Today I'm going to be talking about Good Samaritan laws and understanding the legal. Am I too loud? Is this good? I'm loud to me. Okay. Understanding the legal protections and real world cases. We'll talk about that because y'all really seemed to like that last year when I brought that with the HIPAA. So I tried to pull some cases out to talk about. Okay. So first, what are Good Samaritan laws? Like, who in here has never heard of Good Samaritan laws? Okay, good. All right, so the legal provisions that protect individuals from or who provide emergency assistance. So let's say you're driving by a car wreck and you help someone. That's what we're talking about today. More often than not now, you find someone who may be in an overdosing situation and you help them. So we're going to talk about a lot of these different situations. Designed to encourage bystanders to help without fear of repercussions. And we're going to talk about all of that today, about what can happen to you if you do help, and why some people are afraid to stop and help. And we're going to talk about a few times that people have been sued by helping. And I also want you guys to get out of today to understand the differences and to go be able to research the laws in your own state. So we'll talk about that a lot too. So when they started the Good Samaritan laws, they really started this to encourage people to assist. And they wanted to provide people with some sort of feeling of protection. Like if you do help someone, you're not going to have any repercussions to it. Nobody's going to come back on you if you do something wrong. That's kind of the feeling they want you to have from it. And they wanted to be able to build a sense of community and a structure that everyone did feel comfortable helping everyone, and that you would intervene if you saw an emergency situation. So the origin of the term actually does come from the Bible, where a Samaritan helps a stranger in distress. A lot of the states had laws like this before, but really around the 1960s, that's when these laws really started developing and taking shape. And so now every state has a Good Samaritan law in place. But the key is that each state's different, completely different. So within these, there are some similarities between each state. So again, the scope of the protection is to cover people who voluntarily assist without compensation. And remember that I said without compensation, because that's important in a lot of the state laws. It does say if you receive any compensation, you're not a Good Samaritan any longer. Good Samaritans are people who are not getting paid to do this. So in a couple of the lawsuits we'll talk about here in a little bit, you'll see how that plays into someone not being pulled into a lawsuit because they did not get paid to help this person. The standards of care across all boards protect acts done in good faith within the helper's capabilities. Again, that is important. In several of the cases that I read, and I think I brought one of them in, if you're trained to do something and you help, okay, that's great. But if you do something outside of that training, then you're liable. So it's kind of like if you're, like for example, back when I was doing DME, if it was an LPN that was a family member, we could train them to help their family member. But if someone hired an LPN, I couldn't train them to help their family member. So it's kind of like that. You have to stay within the scope of what you are able to do, even if you're trying to volunteer to help somebody. If you're not trained, it's a little different. All of these things really don't matter until you come down to a lawsuit. And then it's going to be, well, where's the neglect? Where's the line drawn? Where was the training that they had for this when they could have stopped at what they did here? So we'll talk about this as we go through some of these cases in a minute. So again, the limitations. Does not protect against gross negligence or any intentions of misconduct, but remember the laws do vary by states. So these laws, or these states, are the only states that cover medical professionals doing their job. And I have a case in a little bit. We'll talk about an example of that. So outside of these states, the medical professionals are not discussed at all in the Good Samaritan laws. So if you are within these states and there's lawsuits, sometimes the Good Samaritan law can actually be brought into your defense. And in one of the cases that we're going to talk about, that's exactly what happened, and they were able to get out of this lawsuit because of this very law. Okay, so also administering drugs. You don't think about it, but all of these drugs, and I'm not going to point, but all of these drugs have, at some point, you've heard somebody talk about needing this in an everyday situation. And think about an emergency situation. Let's say somebody's having an allergy attack, and you know they have an EpiPen, and you give it to them, and they still die. Or they still end up in the hospital and they are, permanently injured. Could you be liable for giving them that epi shot? You're not trained to do that. You don't have any reason to do that. You just know that they're, a person that would need that, and they're in this situation. In certain states, it's not covered by the Good Samaritan law. So you could be liable for giving the EpiPen to somebody. Like diabetics. If you give them something to shoot their sugar up, or insulin if their sugar's too high. Again, if it's not covered, you could be liable for that. Even though it's exactly what they need, you're not trained to do that. You could definitely find fault in that. So everyone really needs to check their states to see what falls within it. Think about something as an inhaler. Like, as a respiratory therapist, whatever, we shoot them things all day long. We don't care. Like, that ain't nothing to us. But it's a medication, and you're giving it to somebody in a situation that you really shouldn't, maybe. So, of course, nitroglycerin, that's another thing. Narcan. I will say, in all of my research, I did find that Narcan seems to be the one drug in the majority of states. I dare to say all states. Verify. Disclaimer, this whole thing, I'm not an expert on this. I did a lot of research for this presentation, but check your own states. But I do believe Narcan is the one drug that's probably covered in almost all states now that you can administer and still be covered under the Good Samaritan law. Oxygen, with us, that's an everyday thing. You wouldn't think about it, but that could also be an issue. And the AEDs also. Everybody thinks about those just hanging everywhere and you can use them. And you should and you can, but what about the laws? Does it actually cover you if something really happened and that person was to pass away and you didn't do it correctly? Could that come back on you? I don't mean to be up here like making people think they're never going to help anyone. I'm just trying to educate everyone to make sure that everyone knows how to do it correctly and try to stay as safe as possible. Because I kind of got down reading this too. Because I've stopped at a few accident sites before. I've walked out of a store and seen somebody in, overdosing and had to call the ambulance and stay and help. I've been in those situations myself, and I helped, and I never even thought of any of this. So I thought it was very interesting as I read through, just thinking about my life experiences and what I've done compared to what might have been the law versus not. Okay, so of course, with everything, there's controversy and there's challenge. So the first thing is always fear of legal action. Like we've talked about already, it does make some people hesitant to stop and help. Understandable, And then the fact that, each state does have its own laws. You may be on vacation. What if you think you're covered and you know your laws, but you're on vacation and you're not covered? It's something different. And then the moral versus the legal duties. Should there be an obligation to assist? And that debate continues. However, I think last slide, I don't want to get into it too much, but I wanted to include it. There are 3 states that you can face charges if you do not help someone in an emergency situation. So we're going to talk about that, I think, on my last slide. Okay. So the impact of the Good Samaritan laws once they were created in the 60s, truly has been an increase of people willing to help. You know, people do have that feeling that I'll be covered and I'll be able to help someone. So the response has been a big increase for Good Samaritans to help others. Positive survival rates also, because if someone gets assistance quicker, that's much, you know, everyone, like, especially the bleeding or the overdoses. I mean, think about that. How many, I mean, I know people in here have heard about all of these overdoses and how many lives have been saved because people have intervened. So that's another positive. And also, states promoting awareness to clarify the legal protections. So states are now starting to talk about it more and try to educate people more on the actual scope of those laws. All right, so a lot of you in here know me, and I'm a bit extreme, and I'm dramatic sometimes. So I added this slide in before we actually start talking about real life. Thought I'd talk about a few things I've seen on TV that, you know, people might take to heart. So let's talk about a couple situations. So let's say a Good Samaritan's performing CPR on somebody and they break a rib. That would be within the normal scope of CPR. We've all done CPR and broke a rib. That happens, especially, you know, on older people, that could be a possibility. My first time doing CPR, I can literally still feel it in my hands. I was a student and I was like, so, you know, but we've done that. We feel that. But if you open up a chest and try to massage a heart, you know, that's a little neglectful. That's, you know, you shouldn't be doing that. That's a little far. So, you know, but that's the kind of stuff they do on TV, man. They'll just pop that chest right open like it's easy, and they brought them back to life. So, and then the next one that's always my favorite is the pin for a trach. So let's talk about this. You're in a restaurant, somebody's choking, you do the Heimlich, you break a rib, you know, you do something to them in that situation. Normal practice, you've done the Heimlich, you've done what you're supposed to do. Or I'm gonna pop their neck open and put a pin in there, you know, a little outside of your scope. So that could be a time that you would have some lawsuits against you. But I like this picture because it wasn't too gross, and but it got the point across, what I was talking about. So now we'll talk about some real life examples. Okay, so this was in New York, all right? All of these cases are kind of old. I didn't really want to bring up anything too early on or too close to the time we're at now, because, you know, people may be attached to that. But this is basically a gentleman who was in a military environment and he was at a hotel. He experienced a cardiac event, okay? Now, I read about all these lawsuits in great depth, and then I shortened them all for you, so I'll tell the story. I'm a pretty good storyteller. So he's there. They find him. They call 911. The VA hospital is on site, of course, there, close by. They send their EMTs over. The man ends up in a coma for a while, and he passes away, I think, like a month later or so, give or take. His wife sues. Here's the reasons that she pointed out in court that she was suing for neglect. This is what the EMTs did not do. I pray that this is leaving out documentation, and just a side note, if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. 100%. But if this really happened, so sad for this man. But when they got there, he was alert and barely talking. By the time they dropped him at the hospital, he was not talking any longer. So he was conscious when the medics arrived, but later lost consciousness. That was right when they dropped him off at the hospital. So he actually does end up suffering brain damage and ends up in a vegetative state before his death. So her claims of neglect were based on no blood pressure was documented at all. They delayed CPR, and this must have been documented, that they initiated CPR only when the doctor from the hospital called and told them to start it. So he was without oxygen for at least 6 minutes after they were there. And I guess, I don't know if they called and asked or if that's their protocol, but that's what happened. And they must have documented that because that was on there. The next thing, he was vomiting. They did not place an airway, nor did they suction. They did not document it at all, and they did not place an airway. And they did document that he was vomiting. So, to sum it up, the standards of care that she was saying, that failure to take the blood pressure, failure to secure his airway, delay in providing oxygen, that was the other thing. They did not do bag mouth on him, so they did not even bag him. Yeah, and he lost consciousness along the way. So then they delayed the CPR and improper administration of CPR once it was administered. Which if they had to be told 6 minutes later, you're kind of like, yeah, probably, but don't know for sure. So the verdict in court did rule that the EMTs work for the VA, who is contracted to take care of the veterans, not civilians. They were doing a favor by taking care of this man. So they were not neglectful at all. And they were not in the suit. She had a bill of $884.85 that she still had to pay because none of it was due to the ambulance. It was all at the hospital. And that was the verdict, was she ended up having to pay the hospital the $800. Yeah. I mean, to me, when I read that, I thought, I really hope they just didn't document. I mean, because if they did everything right, that situation, that ending could still be the ending. We've all seen that, you know, but like, wow, to think they didn't do all of that and they're not liable to be neglectful at all. That blew my mind when I read that one. So next we've got one in California. This is a big one. When you Google this one comes up over and over and over and over and over. I shortened it down for you guys, and I'll tell you. A couple friends from work get together. In some stories I read, and some of the newspaper articles, they were smoking pot at each other's house. They were at the friend's house. Other friends came over. They're all work friends. It's Halloween night. They go to a bar at 10 o'clock. They have drinks. They then drive back home in 2 cars. The one car has 3 people in it. The car with the Good Samaritans has 2 in it. They do all drink. They all talked about it. They all admitted how much they drank that night. And they left the bar at like 1:30. They're on their way home. The car in the front hit a tree. The car in the back had the 2 Good Samaritans in it. One went to the driver's side. One went to the passenger side. The one that went to the driver's side, the driver got out, walked away, minimal injuries. The person in the back seat on the driver's side got out, walked away, minimal injuries. The lady on the passenger side could not get out of the car. And depending on which side of the story you hear, the Good Samaritan took the person by the arms, pulled them out of the car, and left them beside the car. Okay? Causing damage, permanently paralyzed this lady. So, she sued her friend. Okay? This lawsuit's been going on. It went on for over 10 years. And so I think they finally settled everything in 2014. Yeah, 2004. So, when they get to court, the Good Samaritan says, I saw smoke. I saw something leaking from the car. Thought the car was on fire. I went in. I picked her up like a baby, arms, legs, brought her out. The defense, or the plaintiff, said, no, pulled me out by my arms. I mean, this lady was alert the entire time and had other witnesses that agreed, did pull her out by her arms and left her laying right beside the car. If you were actually in fear of the car blowing up, you would have moved her further. So, this is in the state of California. She was sued and she lost. and millions of dollars is what she ended up having to pay. And the lawsuit went on and on and on because they were trying to get one insurance company to pay it, another insurance company to pay it. They wanted the driver of the car's insurance company to pay for the wreck and part of the damages for the injuries. The Good Samaritan's personal car insurance actually got involved, even though the Good Samaritan wasn't the one driving. Her insurance sued the other insurance. So it's been going back and forth for over 10 years, and they finally settled. But it was millions of dollars. Okay. This one is interesting, and this one talks about the Good Samaritan laws that cover medical personnel versus non-medical personnel. So we have Texas. A physician, possibly the ER physician, but a physician in the hospital gets paged. Need help in labor and delivery. They get there. The baby has the shoulder out. It's called shoulder dis something. What is it? Dystocia? Yeah. So they end up, that doctor ends up helping. They get the baby delivered, but the baby has injuries. And is this one that, yeah, this one suffered injuries but did not pass away. Yep. So this one had injuries. I think was injuries to the arm. There wasn't a lot of detail on this one I could find, but I do believe it was injuries to that arm. And they basically ruled against the plaintiff in this situation because they said by Good Samaritan laws, this doctor was not on call. This doctor was in the hospital. He came to help with this patient who he did not get paid to help. This other doctor who was there delivering the baby was the baby's doctor, the mom's doctor. That doctor was getting paid. This doctor was covered under the Good Samaritan law because he was not getting paid. He was just there to help. So he was excluded from the lawsuit because of the Good Samaritan law. Same exact situation happened in New Jersey. Completely, totally different outcome. I think this one did say it was the ER doctor. And this one got an emergency call to labor and delivery to come help. And the baby was, again, stuck with the shoulder. Exact same diagnosis and same problem. This baby did have injuries and later on passed away. And this doctor was deemed to be responsible as the doctor who was the one receiving the payment for the labor. Because under New Jersey's law, it's Good Samaritan law, healthcare workers are not covered like that. So if you're in the hospital and you're working, then, and whatever you choose to do, that's what you're liable for. So again, check all of your states to see what laws and what's covered for you. Overdoses. This is something that I was talking about, that a lot of the states have made addendums to their laws. And this one's a little broader too. With the Good Samaritan laws for overdoses, an individual can call and be high and call 911 and have drugs on site and not be arrested because they called in the better of someone else to help someone else in an emergency. So anybody who, like I said, does deliver Narcan, most of the time that's covered in all states. Just make sure you check your states, but most of those are covered. You know, they give those out everywhere now without prescriptions. You can get them just about anywhere. You're also covered for possession of paraphernalia, except in certain situations in certain states. If you have enough to be considered a dealer, you're going to jail. But it is in certain states. If you have a warrant and they figure that out, you're going to jail. If it's either a dealer situation or you have a prior that they know about and it's not to do with this situation of why you called 911, you could possibly go to jail. But more than likely, you're not going to go to jail because you are covered under the Good Samaritan law. Only certain states will go past that. And just tips for bystanders. So ensure your safety before you help. That always needs to be top priority for people. We always hear of good Samaritans that end up dying trying to help somebody else. Always contact emergency services when you're doing this. First of all, it should be done because there's an emergency situation, but that helps cover you for liability because you did the next step as soon as you could. Help within your abilities and don't try to attempt advanced procedures. So no pin trachs. I know, right? Everybody was coming in here hoping they was going out with a pin trach. Know your state's Good Samaritan laws and the guidelines that you need to stay within. Okay, so the ways to protect your liabilities is take a CPR or first aid class. That way you're trained. So if you do end up in a lawsuit situation, you can say, I was trained for what I did and how I helped. And follow your training. Don't go, if you are trained, don't go out outside of your training. So don't do anything you're not trained to do. Get professional help for the victim and never accept gifts or compensations or rewards. That puts you in a different category. You're no longer a Good Samaritan. You got paid for your actions. Even if it's after the fact. You got paid, you changed your law. You are not covered under Good Samaritan any longer. All right, ways that they could help with these laws. Uniform. If we could just have the states have one law that actually covers everything, that would be the best. So then no matter where you are, what situation you're working in, travelers, a lot of travelers go to different states. You need to know what you're dealing with. And then extend to cover more types of emergency assistance, which they are kind of doing that, but I mean, the opioid crisis that we have was spiked before they started adding that. But they could broaden the wording and make it a little more specific. Car accidents, that's extremely common. Maybe put something in there, you know. And then public awareness, educate the public. A lot of people don't know that they might be liable. They think they can just stop and help anybody in any situation, even if they are medically trained. So, you know, broaden the education on this subject. Now, these are the top 3 states, Vermont, Minnesota, and Rhode Island. And I just did a very shortened version of the law. But each one of these states at the end of their law say penalties apply for noncompliance, penalties for inaction, penalties for failure to report. So in these 3 states, I mean, does anybody remember the Seinfeld finale? Yes? They got in trouble and got arrested for not helping a little old lady who was getting mugged, wasn't it? Yeah. And it was under that law. It was under the Good Samaritan law. These are called duty to assist laws. So you can always Google your state for their duty to assist laws. These other 3 states have a duty to assist, but they reminded me more of like a mandatory reporter, like how teachers and certain people are mandatory reporters. That's kind of what it felt like here, but they expected the general public to all be mandatory reporters. If you suspected abuse, if you had any information about a murder that mentioned those kinds of things or any violent crime, you should report. They did not say that you would face penalties, so I didn't put them in that category with the top 3. So the top 3 are very clearly say you will face penalty for inaction. Okay, and that's all I had.